Ladies and gentlemen, HAI President Matt Zuccaro.
Okay. It's like I said this morning when we played that, I'm going to get a couple of calls, I'm sure. Noise complaints. What I'd like to do is just give you a brief overview of the UAV issue as it faces the helicopter industry from our perspective. And then the good news is that we have FAA representation to really give you a more detailed in the weeds overview from their perspective of UAV issues. And what I'd like to really start out with is establish a couple of the basics here. UAVs are present in the system. They have been for a while. They're going to stay here, and they're going to grow and proliferate. And I think those are just basic facts that are the truth. What does that mean to the helicopter industry? Well, a couple of things, quite frankly. Number one, the obvious concern by all GA and aviation is the proliferation of UAVs in the system. Can it be done safely? Can it be the best operationally efficient use of the airspace? And I know I personally believe it can. It's like everything else that's introduced that's new. It takes a lot of planning, a lot of due diligence, and a lot of commitment to maintain the safety level of the National Airspace System and to make sure we efficiently can do our jobs, no matter what class and category of aircraft we are, be manned or unmanned. In the sense of what's the direct effect down to the level of the helicopter industry, there's going to be a number of missions that are actually going to be conducted by UAVs that are currently being conducted by helicopters. I think that's pretty clear. Some of them that I would note would be things like aerial photography, film making, electronic news gathering, aerial applications, surveillance for emergency services, be they police or fire. I think some of the other ones would be transport of critical packages or materials that are high priority to be delivered to a particular scene of an event that might be happening. There's certainly other things that are going to occur with UAVs as an offshoot. One of them is in the power line pipeline patrol business and inspection. UAVs have on test programs and will be in the future, I'm sure, be patrolling power lines and be patrolling pipelines. In the offshore market, there was a system which currently exists where they have, as you would imagine, a normal preventative maintenance inspection program of the offshore oil rigs. They were done by people with technical equipment that would actually move around and climb around the rigs. UAVs are now doing some of that work. So what the position of the helicopter industry should be, which I think is proper, is to look at this as a new venture, a new opportunity to supplement the services that you're currently doing with your helicopter. And I think that if you looked at it logically from a business case, it would behoove us to look at this as additional services and get into the business. Start thinking about retaining the people who have that skill set that actually operate these things, build them, maintain them, and people in sales and marketing to see how it supplements your existing business. I've already heard of a case where there was a power company that used to retain a helicopter operator to do some of the work I just described. And at a given point, they advised the service provider that they were switching in-house, that they had purchased some UAVs, and that they had hired some people who had that resident background training and experience, and that they were not going to use helicopters for that very specific mission profile. I think the better scenario to that story would have been if the helicopter operator had actually got ahead of that curve and developed that within his own company, and then he would have been the one going to the customer base saying that this is something that we have developed that we want to offer you as supplement to what we're doing for you now. And so that really is kind of like the reality of what this situation is, to be quite frank. But the primary focus for us is all of those things I just said, but it's always going to be the safety aspect of this. We're very concerned that we get the right regulatory environment that requires the resident training and communications capability between the unmanned vehicle and the system, as well as the surveillance capability. We have to know that the people who are operating them are trained, qualified, and proficient, that they're knowledgeable of the federal aviation regulations that apply to them when they're operating for commercial purposes within the same airspace. We also have to know that the communications is established with the vehicle and that either aircraft or ATC can talk to this vehicle. And the surveillance is critical of knowing where the vehicle is and what its intentions are. That being said, everything I just described only applies to commercial UAV operations. If in fact you're a young woman or young man and you just think that these are neat to fly and you want to do them as recreation, personal use, you get on Amazon or walk into Brookstones and buy something and then put the batteries in, charge them up, and away you go. There's not going to be a regulatory oversight per se to the level it is for the commercial vehicles. And that could be problematic for us down the road as we develop this. So I think the important thing here is that we really get to know this industry, we get to ourselves knowledgeable and keep an open mind about how we're going to interface with these vehicles. Later on today, you're going to hear that the board of directors and staff of HAI have agreed that one of the initiatives initially that we want to take is to form an unmanned vehicle committee. And the basis for that committee hopefully will come out of the attendees that are here. We'll be looking at the end of the session for people who are interested in this and in essence want to serve on that committee. And the makeup of the committee is going to be people from the helicopter industry, HAI members of course, people that are in the UAV business that have an interest in pursuing some of the mission profiles. And I think if we get a good open discussion on this, like any other problem or issue or concern you have, you can work it out. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dave York, who's going to be your moderator for today. And I think this is going to be a good initiative, and I'm looking really to engage the new committee once we're formed. And I want to sincerely thank the FAA representation for being here today and talking to us about a very important subject for our future. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Okay, good. Can we put up the PowerPoint, that first PowerPoint you have back there, please? Did he have it up? He did, but he took it down. Oh. Oh, well, never mind. I just wanted to show a funny little cartoon I had on it. There it is. That was supposed to be up there when Matt was speaking. I just wanted everybody to see the artistic talents of one of our people in our office that does these for us. That was done by Marty, who's been with us a long time. Unmanned aircraft systems, they're going to be everywhere. We have to be ready for it, as Matt said, and we have to participate in it if it benefits us, and work to make it safe if it doesn't. So we've got two gentlemen here from the FAA today. We're very pleased to have them. The first one is James Jim Williams. He's the manager of the Unmanned Aircraft Systems Integration Office. He's going to be the key player in rolling out, well, he's rolled out the rule, NPRM, and he's going to be the one that tries to integrate unmanned aircraft safely into the NAS. And so we want to help him every way we can. The other, our other guest is the division manager for GA, the chairman of the U.S. helicopter safety team. He's been a good friend of the helicopter industry. It's Jim Viola. He's the division manager for general aviation. And he's not as integrally involved in the rollout of this thing, but once it's rolled out, he's the one that's going to have to have primary oversight over the new entries into our aircraft, our airspace system. So thank you for coming. Appreciate it. I'm just going to turn things over to Jim, and he's going to give you an update on unmanned aircraft systems and the regulation that goes with it and the plans that the FAA have to integrating it with the NASA. I just want to remind him going in that that 500-foot level airspace is a place we hold dear to our hearts, and we want you to remember that as you start bringing these unmanned aircraft systems into it. So Jim, take over, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I love that cartoon, because one of the things that it just really irritates me about the press is they call unmanned aircraft drones. Well, a drone is a male bee. So that cartoon is about all those male bees flying around near that helicopter. So you know the reason why the military calls them their certain aircraft they actually call drones, because they invented that term back in the pre-World War II days when they invented radio-controlled aircraft to use as targets. As you see, so the male bee basically hangs out and does nothing until a queen is born, and then he flies once, mates with the queen, and then dies at the end of it. So a drone aircraft is one that flies once and dies at the end of the flight. So I thought it was perfect. But it doesn't really apply to the kind of unmanned aircraft that we're talking about integrating into the National Airspace System. First off, they're not targets, and we definitely don't want anybody or anything to die as a result of their flight. So we don't use that word. So if I slip, you can come hit me later. But my office is responsible for integrating across the FAA our policies, procedures, plans, rules, etc. And it's not just for the Flight Standards Service and the Aviation Safety Organization, but also with the Air Traffic Organization and even with airports and then the staff offices as well. So our office mission, if you will, is safe, efficient, and timely integration of unmanned aircraft into the national airspace. Well, safe because it has to be. That is the FAA's #1 priority. Everything we do is about safety, and so safe integration is the key. But we're also a service provider, and we really pride ourselves on running an efficient, predictable national airspace system. So we can't integrate unmanned aircraft at the expense of the manned aircraft, so we have to maintain the efficiency of the system as we integrate unmanned aircraft. But it also, we must be timely. This industry is coming whether we want it to or not, and they're pushing on us every day, and Congress is pushing on us every day, so we must move forward rapidly. So safe, efficient, and timely integration is what we're working for in my office and across the FAA. So you might ask, well, who is using unmanned aircraft? And obviously everybody's seen the military use, but you may not have noticed that a lot of the other federal agencies, and there's growing numbers of police departments and states that are all getting into the business. NASA is both a user of unmanned aircraft for their science missions, and they're doing a lot of research on the aircraft themselves and helping us with integration. So it's broad-based across the federal government. One of the more recent interesting efforts is the Department of Interior, National Forest Service fire fighting folks are looking at using optionally piloted helicopters to help them with their mission of fighting forest fires, the major forest fires. On the civil aircraft side, there are a lot of companies that are in the business of building them that are operating with experimental certificates, and we've got a couple that are actually have restricted category type certificates, and we're now getting into the small unmanned aircraft business through an exemption process that I'll talk to you about more. These two aircraft, the in situ Scan Eagle and the Puma, are both type certificated aircraft. They were type certificated in the restricted category using the military surplus rules that I know a lot of helicopter operators use those as well. And they're currently limited to operations up in Alaska. The Puma being limited to the North Shore oil fields run by British Petroleum. And the Scan Eagle is limited to operating offshore in support of ConocoPhillips oil exploration efforts. The Scan Eagle's got about a 9-foot wingspan. That fuselage is about 6 feet, weighs about 45 pounds. The Puma weighs 10, 12 pounds, has a 5-foot wingspan, and is hand-launched, as you can see here. Puma is used for infrastructure surveillance up there. They've got cameras on it that can do volumetric measurements of gravel pits. They can scan roads to look for damage to the roads. They're patrolling the pipelines, looking for leaks. A bunch of different, basically, aerial surveillance missions. The Scan Eagle has sort of a dual role. There's some oil fields off the shore of the western shore of Alaska, sort of the northwest portion above the Arctic Circle, in the Chukchi Sea. And the oil is actually readily accessible there. It's only about 150 feet deep, so it's pretty prime real estate for the oil companies. There's one minor problem they have to deal with, and that's the ocean freezes up and thaws out every year. So they can only do their exploration, obviously, when there's no ice out there. But in that transition phase, there's big chunks of ice floating around that could ruin the whole day of a ship out there looking for oil. So they're currently using Twin Otters flying off the coast to do that mission to protect their exploratory vessels. The Scan Eagle is better suited for the mission. It can fly for 22 hours. It has a gas engine on it, and it at 2,000 feet can stay up for 22 hours looking for icebergs. Another mission that they have to do is they promised us all that they wouldn't interfere with the the migratory patterns of the marine mammals that traverse that area every year. So they have to keep track of them and make sure that they're not interfering with their migrations. Well, if you chase whales with a Twin Otter, if you get low enough for you to be able to count the numbers and see them, it makes so much noise that they tend to swim away from it. So you're interrupting their migratory patterns just by trying to see if you're interrupting their migratory patterns. So that's a problem for them. So, but the Scan Eagle looks just like a bird to the whales. They ignore it, and it works much better. So the next area of civil operations that we're enabling is through an exemption process. Now, up until the 2012 reauthorization of the FAA was by law required that every aircraft, civil aircraft, had to be registered, the pilot had to be certificated, and the aircraft had to be certificated. In the 2012 reauthorization, Congress gave us the authority to determine whether a certification was necessary for certain types of unmanned aircraft based on their size, weight, operating area. We figured out that we could use that to authorize these aircraft that will eventually fall under the small rule when it's final, to sort of jumpstart that process. You can see here some of the examples of the areas that we've allowed them to operate. The only one that hasn't been, you can see the flare stack down there. That one is quite common. One of the big areas for using unmanned aircraft is called crop surveillance. And they've got sensors that if you fly over the crops, you can see the water content of the soil. You can see the difference between weeds and the plants that are supposed to be there. You can see if there's insect infestation, etc. So they believe that there's really big business in this. So a bunch of folks have asked us for approval to operate that way. The first ones we did were the movies. I think there's in the past, manned helicopters have performed that mission, but these unmanned aircraft can perform that mission safer and at a lower cost and still get the same kind of shots. And actually, the movie folks say that they can get shots that they couldn't get with a manned aircraft. So this is becoming big business for us. Unfortunately, bigger than we anticipated. There's now over 550 applications for exemption pursuant to this, and at this point I think we're getting close to having completed 50. So obviously there's a tremendous demand to operate here. Now, the limitations we've imposed on these operators are much more than what we would on the small rule, mostly because we wanted to take an interim step, be conservative, because the small rule is a proposed rule, and we may not go this far with the final rules. The rule is really about looking for that area where there's the least risk for the most benefit, and streamlining down the regulations to a point that they're relatively easy to comply with at a very low risk. So consequently, you can't fly over people when you're conducting these operations unless they're part of the operation. You can't fly near structures, built-up areas. You're limited to daytime operations, and of course below 55 pounds from a vehicle standpoint, below 500 feet, less than 100 miles per hour, or 87 knots. So we believe we've found sort of a sweet spot for this low end of the business. They're not required to certificate the aircraft. We believe that the operational limitations that we've imposed upon the operation cover the risk. If the aircraft suddenly falls out of the sky, there shouldn't be anybody below it for it to hurt. So that's the position we're taking. We're looking for comments on that to make sure we've hit the right spot. On the pilot side, we're creating a new certificate for this type of pilot. It's strictly a knowledge-based test. We're not looking to provide proficiency or a proficiency requirement, and you'll have to renew your license every 2 years with a follow-on test. No medical is required, and that's pretty much the solution. So we encourage everybody who's got any opinion about this, please take a look at the rule online. The preamble explains the rationale behind why we chose to do what we did. So if you've got any detailed questions, it's all available in the preamble, and we encourage you to review it. And if you believe we've missed the mark, then comment, please. This rule does not address model aircraft. Another provision of our legislation was that we could not make any new rules that applied to model aircraft. The only thing we have in place is an advisory circular that says stay below 400 feet, more than 5 miles from an airport, unless you have a permission from that airport to operate. Daylight hours, visual line of sight. No, the bottom line here is all we did is we put in the draft regulation, we documented what was in the law, so that it talks about model aircraft, but it doesn't put any new restrictions upon them. We think that this will help us, but unfortunately we're getting increased reports of aircraft. We're assuming they're model aircraft, and we don't know that they're being operated commercially, but we're getting increased reports of unmanned aircraft flying where they shouldn't be. I've gotten reports from pilots claiming to have seen an unmanned aircraft at 11,000 feet. Obviously, hard to substantiate that since there's no way to track them. Our radars don't pick up the small unmanned aircraft. So whenever we do get a report, we investigate it as best we can. We believe the best way to try to prevent these is through education. We've put out an interpretive rule for model aircraft, essentially explaining that the existing rules apply to model aircraft operations. We put out guidance to the law enforcement community, explaining to them how to tell the difference between an FAA approved and a non-FAA approved operation, and essentially trying to help them understand that there are some, if somebody is recklessly endangering people on the ground, there's laws, state and local laws, that they could use to address that. One of the best examples of the law enforcement getting involved in this involves a helicopter. The police department of New York helicopter, one of them, was flying over one of the bridges from Manhattan Island, and they saw a couple of quadcopters flying near the bridge, and they maneuvered to investigate. Well, then the guys flying them decided that they were interested in the helicopter and flew their unmanned aircraft toward the helicopter, which greatly upset the pilot. So the pilot watched them fly from a safe distance, tracked them back to where they took off, called a patrol car and had them arrested for reckless endangerment. And they took them off to jail. They did not get convicted of that. The district attorney decided he couldn't make the case, so they eventually dismissed the charges. But New York City has very little tolerance for these unauthorized operators. So we've also put out information to our inspectors, letting them know what they should and shouldn't do when it comes to unmanned aircraft. We also put out an updated compliance and enforcement bulletin so that if the education process doesn't work and you have to resort to enforcement, we explain how you go about doing that. We were validated by the NTSB that we do have authority over model aircraft if they're operated careless and reckless. So, we think we have the tools. But one of the fundamental issues that we're dealing with is this is not an aviation community that's buying these quadcopters. They're going to Amazon and they're buying their DJI Phantoms. An official from DJI who I talked to back in August told me they had sold 750,000 units worldwide. But based on how many sold this Christmas, they're probably pushing 1 million by now. Amazon has set up a separate page just for their drone store, that they call it. I don't know why they're selling male bees, but they seem to think that's important. Anyway, that was supposed to be funny. But Amazon is also, in fairness, they are linking to our website and they're linking to some of the outreach efforts that we have going on. We also are working with several of our associations, I guess is the best way to describe them, in the business to help us do the outreach. And we have this campaign known as Know Before You Fly. We were trying to get out ahead of the Christmas because we believed, and I think it's been borne out, that there would be a lot of them sold during Christmas this year. So we put out a video. I don't know if anybody see our cutesy little video, the cartoon video that we put out at Christmas? A few people saw it. I don't think it's still up on YouTube because it was very Christmas oriented, but I knew we'd hit the mark. We got the highest number of views of that video of any video the FAA's ever produced in our history. And I knew it was right on the money when somebody did a parody of it the next day after we had it out there. So I figured, okay, we did well. But we think it may have helped because a lot of people did look at it. We've got the members of the team are AUVSI, who's the Association of Unmanned Vehicle Systems International, the Academy of Model Aeronautics. So we've got both the promoters and the commercial world and the modelers world, and then the Small UAV Coalition, which is essentially an association of the larger small unmanned aircraft manufacturers. We all partnered together. We came up with this campaign. We have a website, and subsequent to that, we've gotten the Consumer Electronics Association joined us, and EAA. Now, I thought it was very interesting that the Consumer Electronics Association was interested in this, and they asked me to come speak on a panel at the CEA, the CES, Consumer Electronics Show this year, and that's for those of you who don't know, that's the show where all of the new latest and gadgets are announced, and it's the second largest show and trade show in the world. I mean, it's an amazing experience. Well, we decided to send our booth, our unmanned aircraft booth, to that show so that we could help educate this community, because we found out that there were 17 different unmanned aircraft manufacturers exhibiting at that show, and the room we were in was smaller than this, but it had about 200 seats. It was full. The interest in the industry is amazing. The difference, last year they had 8 exhibitors. This year they had 17. So it's just growing like crazy, and it really highlights the fact that the people who are flying these quadcopters are consumer electronics people, not aviation people. I liken it to Silicon Valley meets aviation. And Silicon Valley is not used to having regulation, and is basically unregulated, and they're trying to enter into the highest regulated environment in the country. So it's quite a clash of cultures. But we did make some progress. While I was out there, I talked to the presidents of 3 of the big manufacturers, DJI, which is the Chinese company that has sold 750,000, Parrot, it's a French company. If you've ever been into a Brookstone and seen one of the little black quadcopters, that's a Parrot manufacturer. And then this company called Unique, which is a smaller one, mostly commercial types. They all agreed to start including the know before you fly materials in their boxes, which we think is a big step forward. Here you can see a DJI Phantom. The US president of DJI sent me this after the show saying, hey, we heard you, we're doing it. And that's a copy of our materials, our know before you fly materials, shrink wrapped between the cellophane and the box. So we made some progress. So for those of you who are operators, what can you do? First and foremost, remain vigilant. These things are out there. There's thousands of them operating every day. Hopefully they're staying low and they're staying out of your way. We've made it very clear to everyone that the manned aircraft always has the right of way and they should get out of the way. Anybody who's operating legitimately will have filed a NOTAM, so you'll know their area of operation, where they're supposed to be operating. Also, anybody that's operating per FAA authorization will have an N number. Yes, even a DJI Phantom has to have an N number on it if it's a commercial aircraft operating for hire in the U.S. And we approve half-inch high letters for the DJI Phantoms. So they'll have an N number. And we want everybody to report any unsafe operations to air traffic control. Now, by unsafe, I don't mean you saw one. I mean you saw one that you felt was not complying with the rules. Either they were at a very high altitude, obviously beyond visual line of sight. They were operating within 5 miles of an airport. They were too close to your aircraft as you were flying through. And it's important to report that to air traffic so that we can investigate and try to discover who those folks are and where they're operating and try to educate them to not operate too close to manned aircraft. Because unlike manned aircraft, when there's a near midair, you can't go to the radar and figure out where the aircraft came from or where it landed. They don't show up on radar. So we have to depend on the pilot reports and then subsequent investigations. One of our successful investigations was in Boston. Somebody discovered a video of a guy who had flown his quadcopter up off of a park that's on final into Boston Logan, and he got so close to the airplane that the wake vortex spun his little DJI Phantom out of control. And the inspector was able to figure out where the park was based on its relative position. He went to the park, he asked around, found out who had been operating. He went, knocked on the door, explained to the guy that that was a really bad idea, and the guy promised not to do it again, and as far as we know, has not. So, that's the approach, but we have to know they're there. So that's all I had prepared. I wanted to make sure we left plenty of time for questions, because there are a lot of questions when it comes to unmanned aircraft, and between the two of us, we'll try to answer them for you. All I ask is that you come to the microphone and you let me know who you're representing so that we can know who we're talking to. So, no questions? Can't believe it. Okay.
Sure, I'll start off. Ralph Rosenbrock with NiSource. We are an energy transportation company. We have pipelines and power lines. A little bit of a background. Last year, the UAV conference at Villanova University and spent a few days with those people. We have 6 aircraft that spend almost all their time between 300 and 500 feet. Airplanes and helicopters patrolling pipelines and power lines. I'm also a unique perspective that I am actually looking into introducing an unmanned aircraft for certain jobs along our electric transmission system. But I really, it scares the hell out of me to think somebody can have a 55-pound object at 100 miles an hour and not even necessarily have any physical to require vision or anything like that, or even the ability to safely operate the aircraft. So it's kind of like giving carte blanche. And anybody that's ever tried to operate an unmanned model aircraft, the perspective is a whole lot different when you're on the ground. So the first time up, it's pretty scary.
Well, I recommend that you send us in comments on the rule to that effect. You know, that's why we're asking for comments. We haven't seen a lot of actual problems as far as collisions or injuries to people on the ground. There isn't a whole lot of data there that would support stronger regulation. So we believe that if the more people we bring into the fold and get actual authorizations and operate according to a set of rules, the better off we'll be. Because today we have lots of folks out there operating commercially without authorization. So because there are no rules to enforce yet. So once we have these rules, we think that things will align better. Folks doing commercial operations will have insurance, and they'll have restrictions based from their insurance companies from a liability standpoint, et cetera. So, you know, that's the theory, but if you think we missed the mark, please send us in comments.
Yeah, I think it's kind of typical, and I think it was kind of hinted at before the discussion started. Generally speaking, the larger aviation organizations are concerned with fixed-wing aircraft that typically don't operate below 500 feet. There are a lot of us that do.
Right.
And yes, I plan to join the HAI's committee on this, and I'll be working with them.
Great. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Jim, Dave. Thanks for making the time today. My name is Seth Gunsalls. I represent PJ Helicopters in California. We're one of what seems to be a small group of operators. We fly helicopters and have a fixed-wing division as well, but we've also started a UAV division and are aligning ourselves to begin operating as soon as the regulations are finalized. Our exemption's been submitted, has yet to be approved. I know you guys are working on that, so we appreciate it. My question to you is, or comment, I guess, to the group, and maybe some people are on board with this, is what I would hope for between HAI and the committee that's going to be formed is we would push in the direction of aviators having exemptions approved with maybe even a different set of guidelines. For us, for example, we operate under a 145 repair station, 133, 135, you name it. We feel like our exemption has a lot of merit to it for our UAV program, and we feel like our operations are going to be safe because we've got the aviator mindset, and we're flying machines now in that 500 foot below range. So it's at the forefront of our mind. My question to you is, has the FAA discussed at all potentially a different set of approval requirements for exemption requesters that are existing operators?
No, we don't really have a regulatory basis to do that. We have to look at each exemption individually based on the merits of the proposal and according to the rules they're asking for an exemption from. What you're talking about would actually require rulemaking for us to differentiate. So it's just from a legal standpoint, it would be difficult to do that. Now, I would argue that chances are your documentation, I mean, I don't know, I haven't seen your application, but anybody who comes from the aviation business and knows the safety process will probably have a better quality set of documents and be more likely to go through without a request for additional information that we've had to do with a lot of the folks who really didn't know that. But you know, that's purely anecdotal. There's no regulatory basis that we can use to do it any differently.
Second half of that question is, if we get approval of the exemption, which as it stands is specific to a unit with a serial number, if we're to grow the fleet and introduce subsequent units that have different operational capabilities, do you see that playing out with an exemption for each unit? Or can we do it like our 135 and just add aircraft in the future?
You just have to amend your exemption with additional aircraft. We've actually already done that. Some of the early ones, it's fairly routine. It doesn't require public comment. It's just a amendment.
But it can be a different configuration or a different size unit, or
As long as you can identify it and register it, then and it still fits within the bounds. Obviously, if you decide you want to use a turbojet that goes 200 knots and you were doing a quadcopter that goes 20 knots, we'd have to look at that as a different, does your safety case still apply? But if it's one quadcopter for another quadcopter, it's pretty routine.
And I may have misheard, but the targeted approval window for exemption was 20 days?
120 days.
Nice
try.
Working, 120 working days.
120 working days. No, again, I think I speak for the group in that this is a rare scenario in which the technology has far surpassed anybody's ability to keep up with it. But I think everybody's on the same page, and that we, as an HAI member and hopefully on the committee, we want to get our hands around it now where we can contribute as much as we can on the front end. And we appreciate your department, trying to get those through and validate them on an individual basis. And thanks again for the time today.
I've dedicated about a quarter of my staff to working that full time. And we're still, working on streamlining the processes and finding better ways to do it. So, we're doing everything we can, but the numbers have just overwhelmed us.
Yeah, thanks again.
Hi, Jeff Deerhog from Duke Energy. We have a corporate flight department and utility patrol flight department, if you will. One comment, one question. The comment being not really all that concerned with the commercial operators of the UAV, but very concerned about the hobbyists, if you will. We had a near midair going into Teterboro early last year, came within 25, 30 feet of the aircraft. I just think it's just, at some point in time, we're going to have an accident with them, and I appreciate your outreach with them, but I think there needs to be more done in that regard. I don't know what the answer is, but it's going to, if it's not already, it's going to be a problem. So anyway, that's my comment. And then the question I have is, and I know you probably won't want to answer it, but just give me an idea, a wag of how far are we from operating UAVs on a commercial basis outside a line of sight?
Well, the Scan Eagle mission I mentioned is beyond visual line of sight. So we already are.
And that's in Alaska?
Offshore, yeah.
Okay, so how about domestic?
So we're working,
48.
we are definitely working toward authorizing that for pipeline, power line patrols. It's one of our next areas of emphasis to work. So stand by. I think it could happen in the next 2 years.
Okay, and then they'll have, the capability will be there so that they can avoid other aircraft through some type of TCAS type of operation. I mean, what are...
Well, the early implementation would probably have to be done through some sort of procedural separation. That's the way we're doing the operations offshore. And we have an area notamed that UAS operations could be occurring. If you wanted to fly below 2,000 feet in that area, you go to flight service. They'll coordinate whether or not there's unmanned aircraft operations there or not, and make sure that we procedurally separate. So if the manned aircraft operations are going on, none of the unmanned are going on, and vice versa. So it's possible that we could do that in the lower 48, but we don't have it all sorted out yet. The long term is obviously the detect and avoid systems. We're working on standards for those, but the standards won't be complete until the summer of 17. So you probably won't see certified equipment any earlier than 2018. So we're looking to find ways to approve limited operations before that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, Charlie. Mike, there we go. Charlie Duchek, Midwest Helicopter Services in the St. Louis area. 2 questions. What are the proposed penalties for people who violate the proposed regulations? That's question number 1. Question number 2, is there any plans in the future for operators to have something like a transponder on their unit, especially if that would make it easier to get violations if people went above 500 feet and that sort of thing. I know that's probably not practical for the hobbyist market in terms of cost, but for the commercial operators, and maybe I don't have a technical answer for that, but some sort of a identifying device that air traffic control could pick up Maybe it's not a transponder, but, you know, with today's technology, I don't think it's out of the question for somebody to develop something that you know, could be followed on ATC radar.
So your first question, the enforcement procedures aren't changing based on the FAR 107, and the way we deal with any violation is the various tables of penalties is going to be the same. So careless and reckless is still careless and reckless and subject to a maximum $10,000 fine per incident. But once we have civil certified operators, then we can also take certificate action if necessary against an operator as well. So the enforcement procedures and rules aren't going to change based on these new operating rules. So on your other question, the airspace rules determine the equipage you have to have. So if you're flying in a class of airspace where you have to have a transponder, it doesn't matter if you're an unmanned aircraft or a manned aircraft. It doesn't matter what size aircraft you have. You still have to have a transponder to enter that airspace legally, or a waiver from the requirement, which we grant often when people's transponders are broken. So those rules don't change. FAR 107 doesn't change that. As a matter of fact, it specifically says you can't operate under those rules if you're going to enter into the classes of airspace where transponder would be required.
So the FAA does have the authority, let's say, to go after a hobbyist who violates the 500-foot rule or whatever,
Well,
even though they're not a commercial operator and even though they're
Right.
not licensed or approved or...
so far we've issued 7 civil penalties against hobbyists for careless and reckless.
Okay. You've answered my questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thanks, gentlemen, for being here. I appreciate this opportunity to hear
Sure.
you have to say, and also I want to ask a few questions. First of all, my name is Paul Barth. I'm owner and operator of a company called Camera Copters. We do aerial motion picture filming. Been operating helicopters for over 30 years and 15,000 hours of all kinds of helicopter work. Anyhow, I have a couple questions, but I also want to mention a scenario that I had happen to me last May. My first question, though, is following up on what the gentleman from PJ asked you. Since as Camera Copters, I possess a motion picture manual and waiver to do aerial filming, and with waiver to certain FARs, which I'm sure you're familiar with, okay? So my question is, and I also do possess a UAS, and we're going to get in that business because, as you know, the motion picture business is the first people who came to you for the exemptions.
Right.
So obviously we have to embrace the technology, and we're going to do that. Anyway, but my question is, as a motion picture manual and waiver holder, why could we not make an addendum to our manual and to our waiver and put this UAS under that rather than going the exemption route?
Do you have a certificate of airworthiness for your unmanned aircraft?
No.
Okay, that's the answer. That's why you need the exemption. In order to operate legally in the U.S., you have to have a certificate, basically, for your aircraft.
But because of the fact that we have, this manual is much more restrictive and much more detailed about how we're going to operate safely in the motion picture filming world, wouldn't it make sense to have some kind of a vehicle to, you know, attach a UAS for the guys like us, operators like us who have this waiver, to be able to use it under our manual?
And that's exactly what we did for the first 7 333 exemptions we issued, is that we took advantage of their expertise and their knowledge of operating aircraft as a way of granting them an exemption from the airworthiness requirement for their aircraft. But nonetheless, the rules still stands, and you either have to have an airworthiness certificate of some sort, or you have to have an exemption from that regulatory requirement. Once we have FAR 107 out, then there'll be a means of going forward and operating under those new rules. So we can't do it without changing the rules, basically, or waiving the existing ones.
Is there a way to apply for an exemption under the motion picture manual? I mean, exemption to that FAR for airworthiness?
Yeah, that's exactly what the 7, I think we're actually up to 8 companies now who have done that. They did exactly that. Now,
Under 333?
Yes.
Okay, well, I thought maybe there's another avenue to do it under the motion picture waiver that we have.
No, unfortunately, the regulations don't allow us to do it differently.
Okay, that question. I wanted to follow up with what PJ was asking because we do possess that. Now, moving on to a little bit about what my situation. Before, I've been in conversation with the FAA, both local, I'm in Florida, I'm out of Florida, one office is in Florida, one office is in Atlanta. So I've been talking to my local FSDO, my POI, who I have to have a POI for my waiver, as well as I possess a 133 certificate too for external load. Anyway, I was talking to them back when these drones came on the market and they're flying all over. And people are using them for filming. So I obviously encounter this situation quite often because as a motion picture pilot and working in these environments, I encounter this. So I was explaining to them that there's going to be a problem, there's going to be an accident, there's going to be a midair, whatever. Well, of course, as you know, there were no rules. They're still working on them, and really there was nothing they could do. I was given a name to a gentleman up in Atlanta region in the drone department, and I talked to him about this, and he said, you know, we really can't enforce anything, we can't do much right now, but if you ever see one or you have a situation, because we can't really catch these guys, and to talk to them and do any enforcement because we don't have any evidence. Get us some evidence and we'll follow up on it. So shortly thereafter, I had a situation, pre-dawn, I was working on a live event, filming a live event for Red Bull, over about 2,000 people, over an event in South Florida. And it was pre-dawn, it was dark, and I noticed a light in the distance, and my cameraman and myself couldn't identify what it was. And after we put the camera on it and zoomed in a very powerful camera lens, we saw it was a hexacopter, and it was at my same altitude, and it was approaching me, converging on me. So because we had this camera and we were doing live event, we recorded the whole event. From the time it approached me to the time it went right underneath me, I made evasive action, turned around to maintain visual, to follow it. We videotaped the whole thing right down to his landing in his driveway at his house. That was, by the way, beyond line of sight where he was, in the dark, okay, around a real helicopter. That was there for 30 minutes prior to his takeoff. I was orbiting because I was getting ready to start our event and establishing my shot. So the drone is, drone, I don't know the word, okay? The UAS, okay?
Thank you.
The UAS only has a duration of about 11 minutes. So it was obvious that he took off to do his private fun flight, he told the FAA, the police first, after I was already there for some time. So he knew I was there in the area. 350 feet that I was flying around in a Eurocopter Twin Star on a Sunday morning at 6 o'clock, everybody knows you're there, okay? Quite honestly. So anyway, so we videotaped him all the way down to the ground. We got his address, saw it plain as day we have a very powerful lens, and we called the authorities who were working for us to go over it and talk to him, interview him, find out who it was, and make sure he wasn't going to relaunch it in the air to be a threat to us. They did do that. They went over and talked to him, and I was advised later on. By the way, at the same time this is happening, I made a report to ATC, to the closest tower. I was trying to do everything I possibly could to make note of this and make sure it was recorded, my distance, time, aircraft number, everything I could do to report that. So the police officer went over there, and they interviewed him. Come to find out, he's a commercially rated pilot who was flying his drone around for fun. He told the police officers that he knew his legal rights and he was only flying at 400 feet. It was a line of sight, and he said that he immediately tried to land the drone, or UAS, sorry, as soon as he saw the aircraft was in the area. Well, again, that isn't quite what really happened, but the police officer, not knowing that he could do anything or what the ruhe just drove away, left. So obviously he didn't fly it again. We continued our mission and flew the rest of the day. Well, I'm sorry, this is a long story, but I got to give you all the details here. Okay, so anyway, next day I was very upset because it was very close, it was very dangerous, and I was over top of a lot of people. So I called my POI the next day, next work day, well, which was Monday, and I told him what happened, and he says, get me the information when you can and give it to me. But he said, I can't do anything about this really because there are no rules really yet. He said, I have to wait until your report to the ATC comes to the office. So anyway, long story short again, I compiled the videotape. I compiled my statement, my cameraman's statement, an eyewitness on the ground, a police officer who knew about aviation, who saw me do a quick stop as it went underneath, and I turned around to see my threat and to follow it so I knew it was on the ground so I could continue my safe operation of my job that I was being paid to do. I gave the whole package to the FAA after they had the report from the ATC, and I also sent the package to the gentleman who was in the UAS department. I believe his name is Mike Wilson. Okay? You know Mike Wilson?
Know him well.
Okay. That's the person I had a conversation with before this happened about the potential for this to happen. I sent the package to him. I had a call from the FSDO. They said, do you have anything else to add? I said, no, I gave you a videotape that shows the whole thing from start to finish, exactly what happened, and all these witness reports. I said, please do something and make an example of this person, at least so other people won't do this. And I later on, 2 weeks later, received an LOI in the mail from the local FSDO office, and since have been basically, I'm in the violation process for careless and reckless operation of my helicopter that evening. And it's going on currently right now. I've already had the informal with Atlanta, and it was not dropped. We gave them every piece of information, explained to them what was going on, and it's still in process. Okay? During the period of time that this was going on, I did a lot of research and pulled up some information. And I knew the HAI would be coming here soon. I want to come here to give this story and to talk to people here at HAI. I gave Matt Zuccara the videotape so he could go to the board and show the board. And then, of course, the notice of proposed rulemaking came out, and I see that basically the rule is they can go to 500 feet. The commercial operators operate to 500 feet. I'm very disappointed in that because the fact that all of us helicopter people, as well as some fixed wing, we operate all day long at 500 feet and below, all day long. That's where I am. And I just think there's going to be a problem if we don't have a way to know where it is, transponders. NOTAM is fine, but then again, you got a whole lot more private people flying these things than commercial people. But anyway, I think it's a little bit loose as to 500 feet. But a couple of documents
Excuse me, can we take this offline here, and I'll talk to you after this is over, and we'll get some more details from you, just so we can finish up here, let some of the other people ask questions.
All right,
I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Anybody else got questions? We're going to have to close here shortly, I guess, unless you want to sit around a while longer. I appreciate your doing this for us, and so far you don't sound careless or reckless, so we'll let you just keep talking as long as you want here, Jim. Go ahead.
Unless there's folks who want to ask any more questions, I'm pretty much done. I encourage you to read the rule, read the whole thing. There's a lot of really good information in the preamble that explains, kind of why what we did. I know it might be daunting, but it's worth reading. Oh, we got more questions.
And before he speaks, just say one thing from the rulemaking side. Probably a lot of people here in the room are new to rulemaking. The notice of proposed rulemaking is just that. You wouldn't believe how hard it is to actually get that out. And that just opens the door for all the industry input that Jim was talking about. It's your opportunity to, if there's something that you know that you can operate safely and how you can do that, now's your chance to almost educate the FAA on how you can do that. So that's what a notice of proposed rulemaking does for you.
Good afternoon, Tim Evinger, consultant, also retired law enforcement. My question is surrounding public use. Fire departments, police agencies, do they need the certification, the exemption, or how is that working?
So we've got, last count, I think we had 26 law enforcement agencies around the country operating unmanned aircraft under the public aircraft operating rules. We authorize them through a special outreach process we call the Comprehensive Strategy for Law Enforcement, the Common Strategy for Law Enforcement, I mean. We're actually working with the Fire Department of New York now to try to figure out how to let them operate in Class B, which is a real challenge. But for example, one of the law enforcement operators is in Arlington County, Texas, which happens to have this little airport there called Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. And we figured out a way to allow them to operate within their jurisdiction. They've even operated in the Class B when they had a hostage situation. So that's real world today. Lots of folks are operating, and we're working with multiple new organizations as we speak. I think it'll be even easier for them to operate once the small rule is out, because that's pretty much what they want to, how they want to operate anyway.
Is that a DC headquarter contact?
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, you can reach out to us. There's online under our website, which is really easy to remember. It's faa.gov/UAS.
Thanks.
Good afternoon. My name is Gary Stevens, pilot, flight instructor. I was just curious as to where in the pecking order of the right-of-way rules in the FARs that UAVs may pop up.
They are the lowest on the totem pole. They have to give way to all manned aircraft.
Okay, but without them having visual capability, that's, I guess, one of the areas.
But that's why they have to stay within visual line of sight, so they can keep their aircraft and the manned aircraft both in sight. So that allows them to maneuver away and give way to the manned aircraft. Now,
I guess
obviously,
jumping ahead to the commercial end of it, where would you foresee the UAVs falling in that pecking order?
well, the right-of-way rules are spelled out in our proposed rule. And they say that the unmanned aircraft must always give way to the manned aircraft.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, Julie Stewart, National Airspace Program Manager, U.S. Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management. Hi there.
Hi.
I've read your NPRM in great depth, analyzed it, gone through every single line, highlighted it, noted 69 different times where the FAA invites your comment regarding. And I was just curious, I was talking with Randy last week, and I heard that you guys are expecting about 55,000 responses. How do we move to the head of the line with our response?
Well, the way the process works is that all the responses are taken, collected, categorized, and we write up responses to all of them before we publish. And the responses to all of the comments will be published with the final rule, right? Yeah.
So do you want some of the federal agencies to combine together? Does that help you, or does it help you to have separate federal agency responses?
It always helps us when we get the same comment from multiple people, that we write one comment resolution versus 100.
Yeah, because I could see individual national forests responding, or unless you want a single response from the Forest Service.
Yeah, the public operators is a real question about whether or not it would be easier to continue operating under the public aircraft operating rules or this new rule. With Department of Interior especially, I think you already have permission to operate basically the same way as this rule exists now, using the COA process versus the actual compliance. So I'm not sure how much benefit it's going to give you.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, quick question. Corrie Nelson. I could give you who I'm with and what of that, but that's not really why I'm up here. I'm up here as a title of mother of 5. Because here's my concern. Everybody in here is probably going to operate under rules. They're rule followers. That's why they listen to what you have to say and follow what you do and the advice that you give them. But, you know, I'm in an aircraft all the time. I'm in a helicopter all the time. We practice crew resource management. We're always looking for risks, safety issues, whatever, all the time. So one of my concerns is we're relying on hobbyists, we're relying on people to follow rules. So that's really what we're relying on, them to follow the rules and regulations. So do you think at some point there was going to be some sort of requirement for people who are purchasing these items to register? Because like you said, if I have a near miss, we have no idea who that is, where it's coming from, who in the area might be operating that, unless we follow through and film them back to their location or something. But you know, is it going to take a catastrophic event to have people start registering these items that they're purchasing, these hobbyists registering somewhere so that at least you know where they are? You know, in this city we have, 200 registered, UAV operators. Is there anything that you think will come up in that matter?
In our reauthorization bill last year, there's a whole section on model aircraft, and Congress forbid the FAA from making any new rules that would be applicable to model aircraft. So the only thing we can really apply to them is careless and reckless operation of an aircraft, because that's an existing rule. And unfortunately, that's after the fact. That's why we're focused.
And then you got to find them.
Right, and that's why we're focused so much on the education campaign, because that's really our best way forward. Now, I know that there are people on the Hill who are taking a look at that again, but we only provide input to them when they ask for it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you.
Sure.
Good afternoon. Thank you. My name is Ken McClure, and again, like the rest, thank you guys for taking the time to be here today and answer these questions. My quick question is, in regard to the certification of the operator, it was kind of the word on the street in the latter part of last year that the FAA as well as the NTSB was kind of taking the stance that this would require at least a private pilot certificate. And in this latest review of open comment period, I noticed that that had been changed. And I was just curious as to why the requirement for being at least a private pilot and operating in airspace was dropped.
Well, first off, don't believe what you read in the papers. There was never an intent to have the existing private pilot certificate as a requirement for unmanned aircraft. We had always had the intent of creating a new type of pilot certificate for operation of unmanned aircraft. We debated about the level of proficiency or not, and the level of requirements for getting that certificate. So that was just a false thing that was in the paper. I mean, it's killed me for the last year not to be able to go, well, that's wrong. But now we can finally say, well, that was wrong. It's always been our intent. Now, if you think we've missed the mark, please comment on.
And I did.
Good.
Very much so.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Tarek Lodvi. I'm Director of Safety for Metro Aviation. We operate roughly 120 aircraft scattered throughout the country. We've had numerous incidents of near misses, and I think we're 17 on the FAA's list for investigations, and obviously can't find anything. And I guess my concern, and I know it's very limited in what you can do, but is enough being done? I know it's a start where you're at, but I think the technology is growing a lot faster than what the regulators are able to keep up with, and I think there's a lot of fear for this entire room about that. And I wonder if I can get some comments on you on, I plan on joining your working group and contributing anything we can, but I fear a lot of the concerns are very valid, and I think it's going to, unfortunately, when we do have a near mid-air or eventually mid-air that turns into a fatality, and that's the only time it seems to be listened to.
It concerns me as well, and it concerns everybody in the aviation safety organization. I mean, Peggy Gilligan is on record as saying that, very few things in the aviation system keep her up at night, but this is one of them. And, we're doing everything we can within the constraints that we have to operate under to deal with the issue. The only good news that I have to offer, and it's not really that good, is that the military experience is that manned aircraft are very, very much durable when it comes to running into these things. They're the ones who have experience with mid-air collisions between manned and unmanned aircraft, and all of them have resulted in the unmanned aircraft being smashed to pieces and the manned aircraft being relatively undamaged. I know that may just be luck, but it is the only thing I have to offer that to date, we can't find any evidence of anywhere in the world of a manned aircraft being having an accident of an unmanned aircraft caused by, having an accident of a manned aircraft caused by colliding with an unmanned. They're just built really tough, and the little unmanned guys are built really light and frangible. But that's no excuse, and that's not the safety plan. I'm just offering that up as that's the best I have. We're doing everything we can to educate people. We're doing everything we can to go after the folks that we do catch who are flagrantly violating our rules. Now, like I said, we've had 7 cases where we've gone all the way to civil penalties, and more than I can count of where we've notified people, hey, cut it out. Most people are smart enough to cut it out when you tell them to. So it's only the worst of the worst that wind up going into the letter of investigation route.
Thank you. I appreciate it. One more question for you. Your NRPM, all of the input that you're taking from everyone, I'm currently working on the same thing on the new HEMS rule that's come out, and I know it's very challenging for you guys to make changes once it's been done, even if it's for the betterment, because the guys were telling us from the FAA on the HEMS side that it's literally an act of Congress to start over.
Yeah, ours is an NPRM, so it's very easy to make changes. But if we get comments that say you missed the mark or you need to add or whatever, then we can consider that before we put out a final rule.
Okay.
There's no preconceived notion that it's already a done deal and don't bother to comment. Absolutely the opposite.
Okay, great. Thank you for your time.
I think they may have finally run out
Wore
of
'em
questions.
out, huh? Okay. Well, I'd like to make a few comments, if I could. Just a couple action items I'd like to ask you to follow up on this. We, as Matt Zaccaro mentioned earlier, the HAI's Board of Directors has mandated Matt and the staff to develop a plan to stand up a permanent standing committee at HAI for unmanned aircraft systems. We haven't progressed far yet. We wanted to open with this announcement that it was going to happen and get the FAA in to give us a quick briefing on it, raise some questions and open the conversation. At this point, we are going to seek help from you, the members and friends of HAI, and then the wider, broader industry, and the unmanned aircraft industry as well. We are going to ask you at the end of this meeting to jot down my name and number, name and address. It's on the second slide here of the other PowerPoint.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they got it. There's my email address. If you could send me a letter of your interest in participating in this UAS committee, I'd appreciate it. It puts a short summary of your background, your experience, and your talents that you think would make you a worthy addition to this committee. We intend to try to make it broadly based. We want to include people that fly in mission areas now that we think are likely to find some synergy in the new technology that's coming up. Some of the industries that are mentioned in their rulemaking activity, like utility patrol and construction, power line, pipeline patrol, agriculture, electronic news gathering, some of these things that seem very clear-cut targets of the new industry and places that could be taken advantage of by operators who now use helicopters to conduct those missions. So. But we have to open it to the full industry as well. So we do not know the structure of our committee yet. We haven't done that. We haven't started terms of reference or anything. So we're just in the early stages. But so send me a letter with expressing your interest on it, and we will certainly consider it and get back to you. The other thing that I would like to ask you to do in follow-up to this is sort of follow the advice that Jim has offered you here, that they want comments, and we definitely want you to comment to this regulation. This is a very important NPRM. It's going to affect the industry for a long time. It's going to affect airspace and our competitiveness. So, I mean, there's a couple different angles to approach this thing from. And just look at it very carefully. The comments are due on April 24th, I think. I'd like you to share them with me using that same email address that was on there a minute ago. If you need that again, catch me on the way out. I will be glad to give it to you. But do that. Jim, do you have anything you'd like to say? No. Okay. I'd just like to recognize Bill Crozier here in the audience. He's the assistant manager to the FAA Office of Integration. And he participated in an industry forum we had about a month ago and did a very good job there, too. Jim, thank you very much. You did outstanding, and we appreciate it. And so I say thank you from HAI.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.